Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in here today with us. I'm Twain Taylor, editor at amazic.com, and we bring you some of the best ideas from cloud native, Kubernetes, containers, this whole space, DevOps. And that's what we love. That's what we talk about each week. And if you like what you hear today, definitely head over to our website, amazic.com. That's amazic.com. And you'll find a whole lot more like this. I have with me today someone who needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway because there's just so much to him that needs introduction, and there's bound to be something that will surprise you that you didn't know that he's actually been involved with. So he is, some of you already know him by face, but he is the WSJ Wall Street Journal bestselling author. He has authored multiple books. He is a speaker, and he's a host of the podcast, The Ideal Cast. He started off his career back in the day as CTO of Tripwire, and he went on after that to author multiple books, many of which have really shaped the space that we operate in, that we work in, DevOps, cloud native, one of the pioneers. One of his early books is The Phoenix Project, which came out in 2013. And that was a landmark book. And then after a couple of years of that, he wrote quite a few books, but the DevOps Handbook, that was a really great book as well. And he wrote Accelerate after that, and a whole bunch of books, 6 books in total. And apart from this, he's the program chair of the DevOps Enterprise Summit, which is now called the Enterprise Technology Leadership Summit. And last but not least, he's out with a new book that was just released about a month back. It's titled Wiring the Winning Organization. And this book he's co-authored along with Stephen J. Spear. So it's a real honor because, when I started out in this space about 12 odd years ago, doing a lot of research, learning things, one name that kept coming up was his name. And a lot of his thoughts really helped me learn the ropes, kind of understand what's happening in this space, why these things are happening. So it's a real honor for me today to speak to someone that I've really looked to for inspiration over the years. And so let's all welcome Gene Kim. Gene, it's so great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Twain. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me on today. And congratulations on your incredible podcast and your successes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. One word that comes to my mind when I think of you, Gene, is prolific. Because it's one thing to do one great thing and then, sit back and feel like that's it, I've made it, I've done it. But it's another thing to kind of do something like that year in and year out, back to back. And it's amazing how you just come up with these really, revolutionary and, just amazing ideas in your books and in the speaking, the conferences that you speak at. Just amazing how you've done so much, a body of work. It's really prolific. It's really congratulations on all that you do.
No, in fact, it's funny when I hear the word prolific, I think in the connotation of having written a lot, and it doesn't feel that way. To me, it's just this unending,
just the beginning,
never-ending drudgery of like trying to get a book out. So there's some
Oh
authors
yeah,
who,
writing is hard. Hard
yes,
work.
you know. And by the way, there's some authors like I think Brandon Sanderson, who puts out multiple books a year, and I just can't understand, and I'm just in awe and amazement that anyone can be that prolific.
Yeah, but as we get started, I actually want to ask you about your journey as an author. It's been almost a decade now, more than a decade actually, that you've been an author. And I was wondering, what's it been like, being an author, the Phoenix Project and all these other books that you wrote. What about it being not? What's it been like? What stayed the same when you started out? What got you started out writing? And what's something that keeps you going today? Could you tell us a bit more about your journey as an author?
Yeah, that's a what a great question. Yeah, so the first book I wrote was in 2004. It was called the Visible Ops Handbook, creating world-class operations, IT operations, and 4 practical steps using ITIL. And it was really kind of strange. Sounds strange saying it, but I think the reason I write is to learn. I mean, so my goal then was to better understand the world of operations, because really to try to solve this puzzle of like, um, in fact, if I could just rewind 1 second. So if I were to introduce myself, it would say I've been studying high performing technology organizations since 1999. That's a 24-year journey. These organizations have the best project due date performance and development, the best operational stability and reliability in ops, and the best posture, security, and compliance. And
Mhm.
the observation in 1999 was that the organizations that had the best security had more to do with how the IT operations organization was run. And so it was actually kind of a very strange even claim to make, because in the Phoenix project, the security person is kind of very self-important, shrill, and is viewed as shrill, hysterical, focused on technical minutia. Doesn't
Mhm.
really help with anything that the business actually cares about, or what operations cares about, or development. And so I want to learn about what world-class operations looks like, that actually, somehow security was integrating into, that allowed them to simultaneously get the best security objectives as well as the best operational ability to achieve operational objectives. And so the Visible Ops Handbook was a way to, teach myself and learn from my co-authors, Kevin Bear and George Spafford, about what does world-class operations look like and how should security fit in. Similarly
Mhm.
with the Phoenix project, same authorship team. Um, that was done for a slightly different reason, but the DevOps handbook with my co-authors, Jez Humble, who was just expert in the development space, John Willis, expert in the operations and infrastructure space, as well as Patrick Dubois, and then later Dr. Nicole Forsgren. I mean, that was an ultimate learning journey, trying to codify what the practices were that led to DevOps. So I think what's been the same is ultimately, it was really for me to learn what I want to learn, and that was the same with the case with the Wiring the Winning organization. I'll just put a little footnote saying the Phoenix project was a little bit different, because there, I think the goal was to try to create the. It was really inspired by one of my favorite books of all time, called The Goal by Dr. Eliyahu Goldratt, and it was a novel published in 1984 about a manufacturing plant manager who had to fix his cost and due date issues in 90 days, otherwise they shut the plant down. And it was, it sold like 3 to 5 million copies. It was really for many people, it was the introduction of, theory constraints, lean, the
Mhm.
total production system. You know, uh,
Mhm.
that's they were read it during their MBA curriculum, perhaps.
Mhm.
And so we wanted to write the goal, but for the IT context, and that goal was really to try to see if we can show that the problems that that DevOps set out to solve was relevant to everybody. Anyway, so yeah, does that how am I doing here so
Yeah,
far?
yeah,
No.
yeah, no, that's a great response about, the goal brings back memories because, back in the day when I was working at Google, they gave out the goal to all of us to read. And I was reading that. And then a couple of years later, when I was reading about the Phoenix project as well, I was surprised to find that you actually meticulously followed kind of
Oh,
the framework of goal. Would you mind talking about that, kind of the behind the scenes of the Phoenix project?
yeah, in fact, there's a whole I did it with a friend, with John Willis. We did something called Beyond the Phoenix Project. Just like Dr. Eliyahu Goldratt did Beyond the Goal. So yeah, and the short answer is we the Phoenix Project is really an homage to the goal. And that's really kind of fancy talk for saying, we copied the goal. Same page count, same word count, same plot
Wow,
structure, same
amazing.
configuration of characters, same number of breakthroughs, same storytelling style. And so we studied that book for a decade plus, getting ready to write that book. I listened to the audiobook series Beyond the Goal probably 20 plus times. It's like uh, and I feel like that's over 10, 12 hours of of
Amazing. That's some
material. So just to try to channel Dr. Goldratt. And I remember I had a couple interactions with Dr. Goldratt in 2004, and I'm just so grateful that he was willing to get on a phone call with Kevin Bear and I. And it was just a remarkable person, and absolutely, his contribution to the space is, there are a few people who have contributed as much, to what we think about as the big manufacturing movements in the 1980s and 1990s.
Mhm. Yeah, and if I might add to that list of the things that were the same as what was the outcome, which was, the impact that the book had, because, Phoenix Project had that kind of impact in the IT and cloud space as the goal did for manufacturing, and that's quite something. I mean, we got like what, 3,000 plus Amazon reviews. Uh,
Which is
yeah.
actually more than the goal, but it's actually not quite fair, right? Because the readership for the Phoenix Project is probably more likely to post Amazon reviews than the goal.
Wow. So, yeah, so I wanted to talk about, just DevOps and, you being a DevOps pioneer and, it's been now more than a decade since the term DevOps surfaced. And you've been, of course, talking about it, writing about it, and noticing and observing how, it works in practice. And I want to ask, what have you seen about DevOps in the space over the past decade? What some things that have changed? What has not changed? And what do you see as when you speak to organizations today? What do you see as the need of the heart?
I think the problem very much remains the same. I heard Jesse Robbins, who we mentioned in the Wiring the Winning Organization book. He was the famous availability manager at Amazon in the early 2000s. And someone asked him, is DevOps really dead? And he had this incredible emotional response like, no, no. Anyone who says that, this problem of dev and ops silo behavior, right, is a thing of the past, is fooling themselves. And, it was it was a fantastic response to a well-intended question. And I think what, like many technology fads, I think DevOps, like for me, Jesse Robbins, the way what he summed up was, absolutely kind of what I think of when I think about the word DevOps is, hey, you have two two groups that must work together towards
Mhm.
common objectives, and it's just not obvious that the emergent pattern of how they do that. Um, and what I've learned in co-authoring the Wiring the Winning Organization book is that um, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Is that the problems that dev and ops faced actually happen whenever you have multiple functional specialties whose skills are all needed to achieve a common objective. In fact, one of the things I learned was that managing hospital systems in the 1950s was actually much simpler than it is now, because you basically had two silos: doctors and nurses. You had very little technology, uh, and the reason why that's important is that each technology has a team responsible for maintaining that technology. Compare that to today, where your average hospital has scores of functional specialties. That's first for doctors. Radiology is not just radiology; they call it um, uh, Im- imaging, right? Because it's it's MRIs, it's CT scans, it's X-rays. Everywhere you look, there are more and more functional specialties.
Mhm.
Yeah, pharmacy, supply chain. You have all these things that need to be integrated together, to achieve a goal. And you take a look at most people's experiences inside of hospitals. It's not that great, and it's for the reason that the management system to orchestrate all of those different functional specialties is not up to the task. And in the similar, right, the way DevOps was born was that we found that the management system was not up to the task of integrating and coordinating everything that needed to be coordinated, to deliver value to the customer. And often, the ground zero was the deployment, where all the hopes and dreams that live in the Gantt chart, start being released into production, and it blows up spectacularly. Um, um, I guess I just love to underscore two things that are absolutely the same. One is the need for different functional specialties keep increasing.
Mhm.
Now we have SREs and container teams and Kubernetes and, and generative AI, right? It's just it's not getting any easier. And
Mhm.
two is the more of them you have, the more difficult it is to have the right wiring to make it all work together.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a great response. And what I love about your response is how you manage to kind of take these lessons from these businesses that are, supposedly non-tech and, from the regular business world and apply them to the tech world. And I think that really, opens people's eyes when they see it that way. And your book as well has so many of those examples, like mentioning Toyota and how they
Mm.
function, and NASA, and so many of these other organizations. And you take those lessons and you apply them to tech. And well, your book is beyond that, of course. But I just love how you blend these two worlds so seamlessly. Yeah, that's really.
Yeah, in fact, I had mentioned, Dr. Eliyahu Goldratt's contribution to the, what do we think of as sort of the big manufacturing movement in the 1980s. It's interesting that so Dr. Stephen Spear from the MIT Sloan School of Business, he was part of the second generation of researchers focusing on, what is absolutely the other big one of the other two pillars of the manufacturing movement, which is of Toyota. And so he wrote the famous 1999 article called Decoding the DNA of the Toyota Production System. And so I met him in 2014. And, the quest that we've been on is really trying to understand, what is it in common? What is in common between, Agile and DevOps and the Toyota Production System and Lean and, safety culture and resilience engineering, and really trying to, in this belief that there are common mechanisms at work. And really, we highlight DevOps and the Toyota Production Systems as really the paragon of what a what a management system should be.
Mhm. Yeah. And I'd like to kind of touch on a bit of the last word of your previous response, which is wiring. And it's the first word of your new book as well,
Mm.
uh, Wiring the Winning Organization. And it has kind of an electronic flavor to it, when you think of the word wiring.
Yeah.
I was curious to just get you to talk about that word itself. How did it come to you as like the main word or the first word of the title? And what do you understand by it when you say wiring?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yeah, one of the biggest surprises to me working on the state of DevOps research, and so that was with Dr. Nicole Forsgren and Jez Humble. So I was involved from 2013 to 2019. So that's that cross population study that spanned 36,000 respondents. And this is where the kind of the four metrics of deployment lead time, deployment frequency, change failure rate, and mean time to repair, which was recently renamed to recovery time from deployment failures, which is actually a great great change. Um, and one of the biggest surprises was the importance of architecture as one of the top predictors of performance. So this is Jez Humble's instrument that, this is where I learned it from. Apparently, one of the top predictors of performance is, to what degree can teams work independently of each other, without the need to communicate and coordinate, to have a lot of fine-grained communication. To what degree can they make even large-scale changes to their parts of the system, without permission from anyone else outside the team? There's some other ones like, to what extent can they deploy on demand, right? Independent of services that depend upon. And so all of this is actually about wiring, right? And so in our world, we know about software architecture and Conway's law, and yet, I think if we were to take a more expansive definition, what it says is that software architecture dictates, how people perform work. And by the way, some context. Back in my 13 years at Tripwire, we were always trained to ignore architects, especially chief architects, because everyone knew that they lived in an ivory tower. All they did was release one PowerPoint slide once a year, right, and just would not be heard from, for another year. And that was just a polite way of saying they didn't impact how daily work was performed. But what that
Mhm.
finding from the state of DevOps research showed is that there's very few things that impact performance more, especially about the daily work of developers, than architecture. And so that is really about wiring. And Winston Churchill once said, we shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us.
Oh, yeah.
So too do we create the software architecture, and then forever after it shapes us. And so wiring, we're saying, is this layer 3 construct. So layer 1 is like, the code we're working on, the binary in production. Layer 2 is the technologies, that we might use, like the IDE, like Kubernetes. But layer three is everything else. It's the software architecture. It's how we form teams, create processes. It really dictates, how different nodes in the organization interact with each other, how they're allowed to interact, how they should interact. And so what's amazing is that any transformation, whenever you see this worst to first phenomena, same people, same equipment, same floor space, same technology. Only thing that changed was the layer three wiring. And so when we were talking before about the dev and ops silo and the, what the management system needs to do, that's really what the layer three social circuitry or the organizational wiring, as we increase the number of functional specialties, the more sophisticated it must be, to handle, yet one more silo that needs to work with everybody else. So yeah, wiring is, if I can make one more observation.
Yeah, sure.
We use the word social circuitry, not figuratively, but literally, because a wiring, a circuit takes, something that's in abundance in one place and transports it to where it's needed somewhere else. And so that's like an electronic circuit, mechanical circuit, plumbing, and the same thing, right? The goal of the role of the social circuitry is to make sure that people have what they need when they need it, in the right format, in the right place at the right time, right? Without having to forge and escalate 8 levels in the management chain, right? If you wire it wrong, everyone's stuck. No one has what they need. And when they have it, it's in the wrong format, wrong place, wrong time, right? And they're having to talk to everybody to get it.
Yeah. Wow. So many thoughts in there, talking about software architecture, about the 3 layers that you talk about in your book, and social circuitry, another phrase that's very commonly repeated in the book, and it's kind of like a central idea in the book. But you also
it is the socio part of the socio-technical system. So, all right, layers 1 and 2 are the technical parts. Layer 3 is the socio part.
Yeah. And you kind of give us like a 3-step mechanism, or 3 mechanisms is what you call it in your book, where you it's your prescription for how to go on this journey to being a winning organization. If you could describe for us these 3 mechanisms and what they mean briefly, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, for sure. In fact, you had this great idea of actually capturing this Venn diagram. Would you mind sharing that right now?
So yeah, let me just share that.
Yeah. So basically, what we're saying is that they're really, when you look at all these kind of different methodologies, whether it's DevOps, Agile, Lean, total production system, there's really only 3 mechanisms at work. And what those 3 mechanisms do is take us from what we call the danger zone to the winning zone. So what the danger zone is that, imagine the worst possible way to solve problems. So in my mind, it's you have to do it under significant time pressure. you have terrible consequences if you do the wrong thing. You probably can't see what you're doing. You have no ability to undo, which is a real problem because learning is inherently experimental. And so if you can't get multiple turns at bat, right? I mean, this is like a dismal place to be. So you really want the opposite conditions. You want less consequential places to do experimentation. So not in production, but in planning and preparation. You want the ability to not be working on this whole interconnected, tightly coupled system. You want to be, working on a small piece of a modular system so that small problems stay small. You can see what you're doing. You get fast feedback on your work. And we're saying there's really 3 ways, to go from the danger zone into the winning zone. So the first is slowification. And so that's really making the observation that, whenever you see some people doing amazing things in high consequence environments, they had to have had invested in planning and preparation. So that's like technical debt and payback. That's thinking fast and slow, right? Yeah, this is a place where we can develop new routines and habits and biases, right, that we can use in the production environment. So the second one is simplification. So the slowification is essentially changing when you do work, not in production, but in planning and practice. Simplification is changing the nature of the problems themselves. So instead of highly intertwined, tightly coupled one big thing. We want to partition them so that we can work on the smaller things. So there's three ways to do that. Is you can incrementalize it. So that's like agile, versus waterfall. You can modularize it, made famous by the Amazon API re-architecture in the early 2000s. And so the goal there is to go from a situation where, 3,000 software engineers all have to communicate and coordinate with each other, and they're all stuck. No one can do anything without vast escalations. And chop them up into smaller, microservices, right? So that we can liberate those teams to have independence of action. And the third simplification technique is linearization. So linearization is what modularization does for parallel processes. Linearization does for sequential processes. So that's like the assembly line. That's like the Toyota production system. That's actually like CI/CD, right? You go from manual steps that are ad hoc and scheduled that you have to route and escalate to fixed flows where you can partition the work. You can actually liberate the build engineers from having to work directly with the QA engineers and the security engineers, and you can, better yet, automate it all. So that's simplification, which really makes the problem easier to solve. And then there's amplification, which says, the goal is to be able to detect even the weakest signals of failure so that it can be decisively acted upon to better prevent, detect, and correct. And so that's the opposite of a system that suppresses those weak signals of failure, or maybe even extinguishes them entirely, which is obviously not a good thing. So anyway, you had asked for that Venn diagram, and I just love looking at this because it says, there's actually all these things that seem different from each other, but there's actually common characteristics that span many or even all of them.
Yeah, really fascinating. And, I love how you organized all of these in a way that they make sense. Even just the presentation of this has some of those principles, I think. I want to dig in a bit more to talk about each of these three that you mentioned. And starting with slowification. And you talk about shifting problems offline. And if you can explain a bit more what that means in practice, and what are some examples of how you can shift problems offline, that'd be a great place for us to talk about next.
Yeah, so we have 25 case studies in the book, and only about 20% of them are technology related. And the goal was to show even the boss of the technology leader that there's certain things that they can do to help or hinder the technology mission. And the goal was to hopefully evoke things that are familiar to them. So whatever enabled them to be a great leader, right? They can say, "Oh, I recognize those things," without having to talk about CI/CD pipelines or microservices, or for that matter, cohesion and coupling, right? How do we? These are all important, especially cohesion and coupling. But how do we make it sure that we can explain it to them in a way where it's relevant to them, and also confirms their own experiences? So, slowification. So, if you don't want to learn on the job in production during an outage, where should you be solving problems? It should be in planning and production. One of my favorite examples actually came from your alma mater, Google. One of the remarkable things when you're running one of the most widely visited websites on the planet, which is Google search, was how do you survive, even major natural disasters? And so they had senior technology leaders, realize the importance of creating resilience in it. And, they did a lot of drills to make sure that they could simulate an earthquake, say in Northern California, to make sure that, they could actually, still continue to deliver service, after, a devastating earthquake. What they found was that during these drills, it exposed all these issues. One example was would reveal that maybe a certain piece of critical infrastructure is still running under an engineer's desk. It's not in a data center. It's not highly available. That some engineers didn't actually know how to use the conference line, the Warbridge call, right? That capped out at 50, right? And they actually had to switch telco providers because um, engineers would tend to put the conference call on hold music. So, but another key one was that there was often reliance on specific engineers. That if they were missing, then no one else knew how to execute a certain recovery action. And so there was a famous team called the Disaster Incident Response Team. It's funny, it's called the response team, DIRT, but
Right.
it wasn't about response. It was actually about preparation. So they would simulate these earthquakes. They actually upped the game, and they would actually simulate aliens landing in major metropolitan areas and abducting key engineers. Right? And so that now the teams would have to actually execute the recovery actions, without the Brents on their team, one the person from the Phoenix Project, and so these are all things that um, you know were done in planning and preparation so that when major disasters hit, Google still runs. And I think that the best example of this was Netflix Chaos Monkey. When there was the first AWS East availability zone outage in 2011. Many major properties went down. One of the surprises was Netflix was up when they had widely publicized that they were running entirely in the Amazon cloud. So how did they do it? The surprising answer was revealed in a blog post when they described how, in preparation for such an event, they had something called Chaos Monkey that ran on essentially inside of every availability zone. It would just randomly kill entire VMs. And they would kill VMs in the middle of the day. And so if developers are responsible for uptime and availability, and VMs are being killed in the middle of the day, they're going to get really good at creating services that actually can survive VMs or entire availability zones going down. How am I doing here?
Yeah. No, I think those great examples really bringing things alive. The concept of slowification, really making it connect. And great example there about Netflix. And now we have like this whole idea of chaos engineering, and it's a whole practice now. And there's a lot of focus given to it. So amazing, just 10 years ago, no one thought about it, but then now it's amazing. And the interesting thing about what you said is that it's those little things that get missed out that surface in this when you practice slowification. It's those little things that can really cause havoc. Don't you think so?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, some may notice that slowification is not actually a real word. We made it up, and it's actually in our subtitle of the book. And so, um, for us, it wasn't from lack of searching for the right word. And our conclusion is that after months of searching, there's no word in English that's that single word that captures this notion of slowing down to speed up, the notion of stop sawing to sharpen the saw, the notion of making a short-term investment for a longer-term gain. So the goal isn't to slow down; it's really to speed up. And
Mm,
so I think if I could wave a magic wand, I'm hoping that people will recognize when they find themselves in situations where like, hey, we are having to solve unforeseen problems in the worst possible time. We need to slowify, or better yet, there's something that could go wrong, and we need to take a little bit of time right now to figure out either how to mitigate it, prevent it, or at least set the stage so we can better detect and correct it. And so maybe in the absence, maybe just by creating a word where it didn't exist, we can actually allow leaders to think it, right? In other words, if you don't have a word for it, it's very difficult to think about it, right? So maybe if we create this word, we can actually, have a signal to everybody that says, hey, we need to slowify, we need to slow down to speed up.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. I think really great idea there, slowification. And even you explaining it this way adds a layer to it, talking about slowing down to speed up. That's a great way to think of it. And you know, related to slowification again, one more thing that you mentioned in the book that's necessary when as part of this whole process of slowification is knowledge capture. And to me,
Mm.
that's hardest things to do, because when just doing work, mistakes keep happening. We're humans and things change around us. But then when we do something and something breaks, it's so hard to really capture what went wrong and put it somewhere so that we go back to it and we kind of refer to it, take notes. I see you're a big user. You just shared your Venn diagram on Evernote, but just noting down those things and going back to it is so hard to do. And that's something you talk about as an important part of slowification. Can you shed some more light on this knowledge capture, this idea of knowledge capture, and even give us some advice on how can we actually practice this, because it's really hard to practice.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, yeah, I think the sad fact, and I'm guilty of this as well, is that sometimes we use Slack as a way to capture knowledge. Which, I mean, I guess it's capturing knowledge, but it's not really in a form that allows for kind of the organized, uh, for organize us for the next step.
Mhm,
And by the way, how amazing is it though that we have these chat systems that
mhm,
capture the collective consciousness and maybe even our telemetry from our key tools, right? That's amazing, right? But that is maybe shy of what we actually want. I mean, if I can just totally switch context. So
mhm,
one of the things I do is I take a lot of notes. And so when someone asks, where did all the stories from the Phoenix Project come from? And it came from a something that I started on my uh before my BlackBerry, on my Palm Pilot. So whenever I started this at Tripwire in the late 90s, early 2000s, is whenever I was in a meeting, I heard something really preposterous or funny or hilarious. I would put it down in my Palm Pilot, which got eventually migrated to my BlackBerry, got eventually migrated to my iPhone.
mhm,
Um, it's like all these little lines of things that ultimately found its way. Some of them, many of them, found their way into the book. In fact, really, the next step after capturing all these funny lines was creating the characters who would then utter these words. And so Wes was the person who would always find a way why an idea wouldn't work. Right? You don't even need to finish telling your idea, and he would know why it wouldn't work. Patty is where all the good ideas came from, and the main character Bill was kind of synthesizing that. Anyway, so like for me, a great knowledge capture was Palm Pilot notes. Right? It was there for a reason. It was really optimized, to make it easy for me to write things down, so that I could retrieve them, as it came time to co-write the Phoenix Project. So yeah, to me, yeah, that's an example of a concrete example of what real good knowledge capture looks like. Actually,
mhm,
not for the fastest moving situation, but we can imagine, like, for high consequence outages, right? What are the relevant information? What are the ideas, mitigations that we might want to capture? And ideally, that doesn't get just parked in a Slack channel, right? That gets put into an organized document or into Jira tickets or something, right? So they get acted upon.
mhm, mhm. And do you recommend that organizations set aside or teams set aside dedicated time for knowledge capture, dedicated, like, for example, time to write a postmortem of an incident, something like that? Or do you think it's better if you kind of design your system so that your systems are automatically capturing knowledge for you while you do your tasks, or a mix of these two?
Yeah, yeah, I think there's an amazing example in the amplification chapter of what happens at Toyota, and it's just this amazing description of the amazing choreography and coordination that is the TMMTX. This is the San Antonio truck manufacturing facility in San Antonio, and just how I think it's employs about 5,000 people. It's it's building thousands of trucks per day, and it's just amazing that every team not only does have the andon cord, but when during shift changes, they take time to document things, to experiment. They have a backlog of experiments they want to run, of improvements they want to try. I mean, it just shows how integrated not just knowledge capture is, but knowledge is the input for the next set of experiments and improvements. So I mean, I would say maybe that's the more important thing. How do we reserve enough time in our daily work as developers or technologists to improve daily work. In fact, I think that's a line from the Phoenix Project. Improvement of daily work, it may be as important as or maybe even more important than daily work itself.
I think Toyota even has a term for this, right? I forget the term. It's a Japanese word. It's just one word. I think it starts in K. Would you happen to know?
And
what
the
that is?
Kaizen
Yeah.
is an improvement event. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not once a quarter, it's multiple times a day, Kaizening, the way we do work.
Yeah. Um, and coming to simplification, kind of reminds me of how even this idea of microservices came up, and you were mentioning the AWS example of the way they structured their teams around for managing APIs, and they came up with the term pizza-sized teams. And I think there's been this back and forth across the years about how much should we break
Yeah.
between teams, and how much should we also have teams to be independent from other teams.
Yeah.
There's back and forth, that keeps happening in the space. Could you comment on this? Where do we actually have separation of duties,
Huh.
and do we actually break silos and enable collaboration?
Boy, that's a great question. So the metaphor that I'm so proud of in the book is Steve and Gene moving a couch. So if you'll tolerate a 90-second performance art of this, this is in the introduction of the book, and we were saying that imagine Steve and Gene moving a couch. You might think this is just brawn work, no brain work allowed, but there's actually a ton of problems that Steve and Gene need to solve. They need to figure out where's the center of gravity, to get through a narrow doorway, around which axis do you rotate, to go down a narrow winding set of stairs. Who goes first? Do they face forwards or backwards? And they don't need consultants. They don't need focus groups. Just by picking up the couch, trial and error, experimentation, fast feedback, they will figure out the answer. But there's all these things that leaders can do to make their work more difficult, or maybe even impossible. You can turn off all the lights. You can introduce a lot of background noise. Also, turning off the lights, more dangerous. It will take longer. People might get hurt. You can also introduce a lot of background noise, like a siren. And this is actually makes the work difficult, but in a way different than the first way. It's because it can't, Steve and Gene are no longer able to communicate and coordinate. In fact, we could actually introduce an intermediary that prevents Steve and Gene from talking directly with each other. They have to go through this intermediary, or they have to go through a JIRA ticket. They have to have work orders, or account managers, or lawyers maybe. And so I think what you'll find is that now Steve and Gene may not be able to solve that problem, because really what the moving a couch is a metaphor for is joint cognition and problem solving. And so it says the work has to be, the reason why Steve and Gene can't solve the problem is that the system is no longer coherent. That even though they're coupled to each other, so cohesion and coupling. So I asked ChatGPT, all right, given this metaphor and layer 3 wiring, can you use it to explain both the re-architecture of Amazon into microservices, as well as the more recent example earlier this year when Amazon Prime Video went from microservices back to a monolith? And it explained it so well, saying, oh, yes, in the first case, you had 3,500 people who lost independence of action because you had 3,500 engineers all coupled to one couch. So the countermeasure was, divide up the couches into smaller couches so that each team could work independently of each other. That's awesome. How about the Amazon Prime Video example? And it said, oh, yes, when it was as if they had divided up the couch too small, to the point where the majority of work was dominated by coordination and transport, copying, these video files in and out of storage buckets. And so their countermeasure was to glue the couch back together, right? So that it could be a coherent system, so that you didn't have to copy these files that were operated on, in and out of, context all the time. You could actually have locality. So I thought this was such a great example, because that one metaphor, explains, the beginning and end state of both of those examples. And so what is the guidance? The guidance is you do want decoupling, because you want independence of action, but you can take it too far. If you over partition the system, then your amount of effort is dominated not by the layer 1 and layer 2 work, it's transportation and coordination layer 3. How am I doing?
Yeah. No, wow, fascinating response. I think, yeah, it really shed some light on just the confusion that sometimes surrounds this. And
Yeah.
I like that you finally brought it back to the idea which you talk about in your book as well, layer three and the wiring. Makes us want to dig in and read more and kind of read about how this problem that we just spoke about, how you talk about it in the book as well. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I love, uh yeah, and I'm so gratified to hear that because I love the phrase, anyone can take something simple, make it appear complex. It's far more useful to take something complex and make it simpler and be able to describe this kind of wide variety of problems in a very simple model, and yet be able to explain, observable phenomena and reveal insights. I'm hoping that's what the book does.
Yeah, really fascinating. And one of the other things, the third thing, third mechanism that the book talks about
Oh,
is
can I mention one more thing because we had talked about this before the call?
yeah.
Yeah. So what does it mean for the engineers at
Mhm,
Amazon?
mhm,
When layer three is wired well, uh, everyone is able to be productive. They can spend time doing layer one and layer two work. They can get in flow. They can get locked in. They can solve the real business problem at hand. When layer three is not wired well, when it was overly coupled or underly coupled, I suppose is the other way, right?
mhm,
Your time is all not doing value creating work in layer one and layer two. You're doing coordination in layer three, and under those conditions, right, you can't get anything done. You can't get anything done by yourself. You're dependent on other people who don't care about you, right? They've got a million other things to do, and so really, it's the job of the leader, to create that layer three that enables everyone to do their work easily and well.
mhm. Yeah. Flow, fascinating word. And it's kind of the destination that teams want to move towards. And as we're just talking about amplification, uh, you know, and that's very crucial as well because I've seen a lot of that idea surface in recent conversations in DevOps with the term shift left. It's really
Mhm.
popular now, and just the idea of uh, just things earlier in the CI/CD pipeline, whether that's security or
Yeah.
reliability or even testing, just bringing all of that to the left of the pipeline. So, can you tell us a bit more about amplification and some of the examples and explain it a bit more to us in a way that it sticks?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, in fact, before we talk about amplification, maybe just a note on shifting left. What
Mhm,
shifting left is, imagine if Steve and Gene always had to have a security or safety officer involved. And what we'll find is that, we're now going to have to wait every, you know, um, maybe Steve and Gene won't be able to start moving, or maybe we have to have 12 different individual requests for a security person to show up at critical times. Again, can't get much done under those conditions. And so what shifting left really is that instead of security having to be present and coupled to the couch, they're building tools so that Steve and Gene can work independently. It's not that they're not responsible for security and safety. They absolutely are. But instead, security is helping them do their work with all their expertise built into the tools that they're using. So, that too is an act of decoupling. And that gets to, I guess, the third point is around amplification. Yeah. So I would say amplification is, imagine two systems.
mhm,
A system that is dynamic, that signals are generated, transmitted, received, is
mhm,
probably the most important part, acted on.
mhm,
So even weak signals of failure, can lead to better detection, prevention, and correction. We can imagine the opposite, where these signals of failure are ignored, uh,
mhm,
suppressed, or extinguished entirely. And
mhm,
I think, going back to what I alluded to in the couch example, the best way to learn, the best way to have fun is to have feedback. When your tests take 2 hours to run, right, and they're failing all the time, and your job is to fix them, it's a terrible experience, right? Ideally, you know, um, you know, I recently had an example where I had a whole bunch of integration tests that should have been turned into unit tests with some sort of mocking. And I cannot tell you just how much better it was to take that slowification, redo the tests, so that they execute in seconds, not minutes. And helped my state of mind. I was less frustrated, and actually I was able to fix the underlying problems. And so amplification is all about the leader's responsibility. And I don't say the leader as in the top leaders. There are leaders at all levels. The leader's responsibility to create systems that are really good at giving strong feedback, right? Fast feedback right away, that go back to the person doing the work, right? They don't get sent to a different department, right? Make it so that those are um, immediately visible to the person actually, performing the work. And so that's true in coding, it's true in infrastructure and operations, it's true in manufacturing. And so that's really the gist of amplification.
Wow. Yeah, and I loved in the book how you gave these 6 steps of how you kind of mentioned it as well in your response, the signal being generated, transmitted,
Mhm.
received. And I don't know every single step. It's in the book. Definitely go and check out the book for the exact steps. But yeah, Gene really breaks down this concept of amplification and talks about the signals and the 6 different steps. You should definitely go and read catch up on that book, on that part of the book. So yeah, amplification, really fascinating. Um, and as we're winding down, we started out talking about the challenges that organizations face with DevOps, even as DevOps matures. And most of the conversation was around just the ideas and the advice and the solutions that you propose in your book, Wiring the Winning Organization. But as we wind down, I was wanting to ask you about, talk to us about an organization or a team that, has read your book, started practicing these ideas, and, they've spent a few months into this, maybe a year. Uh, Take us 1 year ahead for this team. What would it look like for this team? Where would they be if they start practicing these ideas and get the wiring right? Over time, what happens to that organization? What does the day-to-day routine look like? What does the culture look like? What are those changes?
Oh yeah, what a great question. Yeah, in fact, let's just kind of march through what it might look like. I think kind of we would go from an organization that doesn't spend enough time doing slowification activities. Instead, they're always pushing on features, they're working around problems, and they're just coping. Instead, there's a signal that says, "Hey, look, we're in a pretty hairy situation right now, and we need to invest some time in understanding what's happening and better prevent, detect, and correct." And maybe this becomes a habit and an expectation that it can't be all about performance. It's about, investing time in planning and practice as well. So slowification becomes part of the nomenclature and a part of daily work, and signals of um, a trigger for activities that, we need. There are certain things that we need to slowify.
Mhm.
Um, Around simplification, I would say, that we find activities that just take too much coordination. And we have too many situations where organizations are stuck. I have to work with 20, 30 different teams. And is there a way to create harder partitions between the modules, right? So that we can agree on the interface, and now we enable both teams on each side of the interface to work independently of each other. That's just one of the biggest that was one of the key findings of the state of DevOps research about these architectures that enable independence of action. And similarly for sequential processes, things that we can really, nail down and then automate. And the result is that people are getting work done faster. There's less interference between the groups, and independence of action is a term I learned from Steve. It is so valuable. In fact, people are willing to pay money to not have to coordinate and communicate and get authorization and schedule with other people. In fact, this is where option theory comes from. Is like to be able to partition decisions today from data we might learn from tomorrow, right? To be able to defer decisions. And then amplification. We create an environment where we are generating more signals so we can get earlier detection of when things go wrong, and leaders are creating this environment where it's rewarded that people are being thanked for sharing bad news, like Dr. Westrom so brilliantly pointed out in his organizational typology model that leaders are using their high energy and high standards to insist, that everyone is thinking all the time, solving problems all the time, discovering more problems, and that's actually what allows organizations to go from one end of the performance spectrum to the other, where everyone's stuck, they can't get anything done. When they get something done, it causes catastrophic failures, right to the other end, where everyone is able to harmoniously work independently when we need to, uh, seamlessly with others when we need to, and for what purpose? To achieve the goals of the organization.
Wow. Yeah, fascinating conversation. Yeah, I really enjoyed the way you explained and added context to each of those ideas. So yeah, viewers and listeners, I hope you guys are equally inspired as I am. So go and get this book and give it a read. Hiring the Winning Organization, brand new, from Gene Kim, just released a month ago. So definitely give it a read. I think as it's and amazing timing as well, just released at the end of the year when everyone's thinking about the next year, planning for the year ahead. It's a great time to read this book. So yeah, before you go, Gene, I've got a couple of questions to get to
Yeah.
know you a little bit more. So let me ask you, what would be your alternate career if not for your career in tech?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think I would be a writer and author. I, I but then there's that Mark Twain quote: "I hate writing, but I love having written." But there's something about writing as a means of learning that I just get a lot of enjoyment out of, except for deadline time, which is very stressful. I guess the other thing that if that comes to mind is I would actually, in a different universe, I think I would have loved being an operations research person. The people on the plant floor, studying flows and trying to figure out how to make daily work better for people who are doing work at high frequency, high consequentiality.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Wow, interesting. Yeah, sounds like you really know where your passion is. And yeah, that's cool. Um, yeah, and talking about writing as well reminds me of this one of these authors who said, writing is simple. You sit down and bleed, or something on those lines. I think one of the popular books on writing, uh, uh, writing well, that book. Yeah, anyway, but yeah,
Right,
writing is,
right.
but yeah, it's very satisfying once it's done, like you said. Um, yeah, your next question, what's your favorite method of learning?
Yeah, I wouldn't have given this answer a year ago because I just discovered it. I love this year, maybe because of just how intense the writing process was. I spent a lot of time watching YouTube videos and listening to podcasts. So this is uh, how ironic that we're talking about this right now. I've learned that I just love that method of learning. It's just amazing how much you can learn. In fact, there was a time when I was listening to every AI video I could find, that was helping me understand what I wanted to learn. So yeah, it's just it's an amazing. We live in an age of miracles where there's so much expertise out there, and all it takes is being able to search, knowing how to search for the right term. It's just amazing.
Yeah, yeah. YouTube has everything pretty much. Uh, your favorite and your least favorite part about being an author?
um, Too soon. Too soon, Twain. Least favorite part. I think deadlines. The fact that for the Warring the Winning organization, it was it was very late, and so but it was a date we had to hit because for a launch of this size, like if we lost our printer slot, we would have to wait 6 months, and that was just not a possibility. So it meant that the schedule, we were very, very late, and we had to sort of make up that time during the layout process and so forth. And so, uh, trust me, I never want to put our team in that situation again where they're having to make edits not in Google Docs or Word where it's safe, but they're having to make it in Adobe InDesign where small changes can actually change every page afterwards. Yeah, that is definitely not fun, and was so that those deadline pressures, having to make compromise and cut corners, that's definitely my least favorite part of being an author.
How long was it? How long did it take to write this book?
3 years.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, the majority of it was done this year. So,
Is this longer than your previous books?
No, that was about the same as my other books. It takes me about 3 years.
Wow, wow,
Accelerate
amazing.
was much faster because Nicole, Dr. Forsgren, was the lead author, and she is much faster and better at this than me.
Mhm. All right. The next question, one person that's had a big impact or influence on you.
No, I would go to all my fellow co-authors. So that would be Dr. Steven Spear on this book.
Mhm,
For Accelerate, that was Dr. Nicole Forsgren and Jez Humble.
mhm.
DevOps Handbook, it was Jez Humble again, Nicole again, John Willis, Patrick Dubois. Phoenix Project, it was Kevin Bear and George Spafford. It's just, man, when you do a book, you're probably spending thousands of hours with somebody.
Mm.
If not thousands of hours, certainly hundreds. It's not with everybody, but certainly hundreds of hours with your co-authors, collectively adding up to thousands of hours. And when you are learning from the best in the game, that is such a privilege. And for someone who loves learning, that's really the main motivation, I think, for me personally, on why one starts a book.
Amazing. That's quite a list of influences and really, yeah, amazing people there. Yeah, last question, Gene, is at a conference or a party, you're usually the person who
At a conference, I'm usually the person attending the talks, taking notes.
I thought you were
I
going to
love
say
conferences.
speaking, but
I'm sorry.
I thought you would say speaking because you speak at a lot of them, but then
No, no, no. But I love conferences just because they're such high learning events, and the mark of a great conference is high learning and high networking. You're learning what you want to learn, and you are being the best in the game. And I think that's what makes the best conferences so magical.
Mhm, mhm. Wow. Yeah, I love how you have that learning attitude and just so much humility despite all your accomplishments. It was really a pleasure talking to you today, Gene. Thanks so much for joining us today. Some amazing ideas that you shared from your book. And yeah, I definitely want to dig into those some more. And I hope our viewers and listeners as well are even more curious and anxious to get this book and read. Thanks so much.
Dwayne, thank you so much, and thanks for having me on, and continued success on this fantastic podcast.
And thank you to our listeners and viewers for joining. We'll see you on the next episode.